The Federated Hospitality Association of South Africa has called on the national government and municipalities to intervene urgently in the continued shedding of jobs in the hospitality sector by reducing the municipal rates. They say their businesses are still seeing a turnover less than 50% of what it was pre-COVID-19, which makes the current ratio of turnover to their municipal rates accounts simply unaffordable and unsustainable. For more on this, we're joined by Rosemary, who's the chairperson of FEDHASA. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Very harsh regulations were imposed on the hospitality industry during COVID-19, and these regulations and travel bans had a massive impact on the sector. In fact, even as you and I speak, there are still some restrictions which limit normal operations which are still in place. Exactly how big is this impact?
The impact's dramatic. Over the 2 years, we were operating, not operating, always operating with restrictions. It was either only 50% capacity, no alcohol, you couldn't go to beaches, you couldn't travel between provinces, different trading hours, reduced trading hours. The obstacles were just insurmountable. Basically, even though theoretically hospitality was allowed to operate, it was not able to operate in a financially viable way because the restrictions were just so vast, and particularly, too, because they actually reduced the number of guests that one could have.
You've asked government and municipalities to urgently intervene because if they don't, we could be facing a jobs bloodbath in the hospitality sector.
Absolutely. Hotels generally their occupancy rate is normally between 60 and 70%. Even our best hotels now are operating at 30%. So basically turnover has been halved, but the rates are exactly the same. So your ratios, so for example, pre-COVID, a good big hotel, their rates would be about 3% of their turnover. Now it's 20%. 15%. During COVID itself, it was up to 86%. It's just not financially viable to have a ratio of expenses where your rates are so high. It just makes the business financially unviable. And government really needs to look very carefully at this and decide, do they want to actually keep our sector going? Because if they do want to keep our sector going, they really need to intervene urgently. The wonderful thing about our sector is that it is really labor intensive and we employ lots of people. So we really need to look at a clever way of stopping the shedding of jobs. And the rates is a very, very easy way for government to do it because they don't have to pick and choose as to who to help. Everyone who pays rates, they could basically reduce them short-term and medium-term just to help us to get onto our feet again, where we can get back to an occupancy level of 60-odd%, where we could be financially viable again.
You say that government don't have to pick and choose should they consider your proposal, but we know that there are certain categories that go and fall within the hotel sector when it comes to commercial buildings. What category were you looking at hotels falling into should this proposal now be heard?
Would definitely be hotels, and in fact all of hospitality. There are some hospitality entities which are actually doing fine, but the majority, particularly hotels, guest houses, lovely lodges, their occupancy is way down. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. We're getting very little international travel. We're in a recession. There's still a pandemic. There are lots of things against us.
Many hotels did survive, as you make mention of some examples there. How do you think they managed to survive, or are they not surviving?
The ones that have survived are the ones that had good resources and were able to make changes very quickly. But there literally will not be one hotel in South Africa that is not financially worse off and financially compromised. There are still some hotels that aren't even open from March 2020 because their core business was international travel and the business market. So everyone is making a plan. Everyone's trying as much as possible. I mean, during COVID and even after that, general managers were cutting the grass. People who were receptionists were busy cleaning rooms. Everyone made a plan. That's one thing our industry really pulled together. Everyone tried to be of assistance. But unfortunately, in the process, there was huge job losses because the entities literally had to do that in order to stay afloat. So what government really needs to do is help us stay afloat, because currently our numbers just aren't working, and we're going into winter. So now is the time for intervention quickly, and we've put a state of emergency in for a number of things, whether it's floods or whether it's pandemic, but I think our joblessness actually requires a state of emergency, because I think that is going to be our biggest problem in our country, is the joblessness, and urgent action needs to be taken.
The tourism sector is rated quite highly when it comes to its impact on South Africa's economy. And as we now jotted down to the hospitality industry, what are the numbers that we're looking at? I mean, you make mention of how much of an impact it's had on the day-to-day runnings of hotels.
Well, our industry, I'm not sure if you're referring to how big our sector is in the economy, but if you are referring to that, pre-COVID, we employed about 1.5 million people in our sector.
Yes.
And that's directly and indirectly. And of those 1.7 people, on average, each person supported 7 people. So that's 10 million South Africans that actually depended on our industry. So currently, we are not doing everything we can to actually help our industry grow. So a good example would be our visa system. We actually discourage people from coming to our country. A lot of our licenses and certifications of things, we're just not able to get in tourism because those departments have just simply stopped operating. So there's so many things we could actually do proactively to actually get our industry to grow. Just to give you an example of how we are not maximizing things. Pre-COVID, Australia used to have about 1.2 million Chinese visiting their shores, and the Chinese now are the world's biggest number of travelers. South Africa comparatively had 95,000 pre-COVID, so that's 1.2 million versus 95,000. And we know our offerings. Our offerings are stunning in our country. They're really unmatched. They're just magnificent. So there's so many more things that we could be doing. But, for example, we make it very difficult for Chinese people to visit South Africa. You've got to go to either Beijing or Shanghai, present yourself in person to actually get a visa here, and then take many, many, many weeks before you get one. Australia and the UK and America are bending over backwards to get that market. Obviously, at the moment, China can't travel at all.
Yeah.
But the point is that we need to really change the way we do things, because as much as our industry is really suffering at the moment, we could be the arrow, we could be the catalyst to create millions of jobs in our country. We could easily quadruple the number of people, number of international tourists coming into our country. And if currently we employ 1.5 million, just do the maths times 4. That's how many more people we could employ. And the wonderful thing about our sector is that we employ lots of women and we employ lots of youth. Youth is what we look for. So we're ticking all the boxes. So all the industry needs to do, all the government needs to do, is just facilitate a platform whereby we can do what we do best, and that is continue business and create jobs.
Now, one expert within the industry has come up with a different suggestion, saying perhaps the answer to getting these rates lowered and reconsidered by the municipalities would be to propose a property classification. So my understanding is that hotels are perhaps placed in the commercial property and heavy industry category as opposed to residential. When it comes to the numbers and the categories in terms of how hotels are classified, how much are you looking at? And would moving it out of the two classifications into residential make a big difference?
Yes, it would make a massive difference. But whatever classification there is, we just currently need some form of, because I can imagine the classification will take many, many, many months to do. Yeah. I think we just need an urgent intervention where there is literally a percentage of your rates you pay or some form of huge discounted price just to help us during this time, because government just needs to look, the money that we spend on investment conferences and things like that is wonderful. But at the same time, if you just enable the people who are currently operating businesses to survive and actually thrive and create more jobs, wouldn't that be a more viable thing?
Absolutely.
So I think they need to get a few good actuaries and actually do the numbers. But I think by literally reducing the rates for our industry and enabling us to operate financially viably, it would be the smart thing to do to sustain the jobs in our industry and actually sustain the businesses.
On average, what sort of costs are you looking at when it comes to rates and utilities at hotels?
Well, I think the easiest thing would be, because it really depends on what the size of your hotel is, but you should be about 3%, around about between 2.8 and 3% of your gross you should be paying in rates. And at the moment, people are paying 10, 15, 20, 28. And remember, during COVID, it was up to over 80%. So we've had that burden of all those months too. So the numbers are just not viable. There's no other industry currently that operates that has got that ratio where the percentage of rates is just so high. And it's not, these are abnormal times. Our industry never operated in those rates, but totally nothing to do with us, something we can't control at all. Our income, our occupancy is less than half of what it used to be. It's just a fact. So while it is less than half, and the government can very easily track that because through Stats SA they track it on a monthly basis, during that time period they could give us some form of intervention, some form of help.
And in the meantime, what are you doing to escalate your proposal? Have you spoken to municipalities and government?
Yes. There has been very little positive feedback. Cape Town municipality gave a reprieve in the sense that they allowed people to pay off over a certain time period and didn't charge interest over that time period. But there hasn't been a reprieve in the sense of actually a discount or reduction in the rates. What we've done is not only on the rates matter, but generally on all the issues which are stunting us as an industry from surviving and thriving, we've actually put in a very, very detailed document to Minister Sisulu, and there are suggestions on how we can actually thrive, not only survive, but thrive in very, very practical ways, very positive methods of actually going forward. And we're hoping in the next week that Minister Sisulu will be actually looking at the document and there will be some form of implementation, because that will make a massive difference to our whole industry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's leave it there for now. Rosemary Anderson, who is the chairperson of the Federated Hospitality Association of Southern Africa. Thank you for your time.